I really don't understand from experience the different kinds of Jewish groups, and often we'll run into secular Jews who are Jews, but they seem to have no faith whatsoever. It's not even an important thing for them. And often for many, the bar mitzvah is like just a rite of passage, moving on. It sounds like yours was much more than that.
That's right. Well, first of all, I did have the gift of faith. I mean, I was God-oriented. I was pious, and devout. But I would again perhaps nuance a little bit what you said, which is that I think that coming from a Catholic context or even a Christian context, one thinks of one's religion primarily in terms of faith and having faith, and that's not really true in a Jewish context. Jews can feel very deeply Jewish, and being Jewish can be the most important thing in the world to them without them even being convinced that God exists. And I will argue that there's a certain legitimacy to that if you look at it almost from God's point of view, because the old covenant, the covenant which gives Jews their election, is not primarily a covenant dependent on faith. It's a covenant primarily dependent on being the seed of Abraham, on race. And so it might actually be internal that the sense of Jewish identity is much more brought forth from simply being Jewish racially than the sense of Catholic identity is brought forth from being, descended from Catholics.
All right, now you had this powerful experience on the beach. Let's talk about that in more detail. Something you certainly didn't expect or were looking for,
I didn't expect it. Although I'll spend the rest of my life thanking God for giving me that unexpected and undeserved gift. I had the privilege of seeing my life as though I were looking at it from after death and seeing everything that I would be pleased about and everything that I would wish I had done differently. And I saw that everything that I did, and everything that anyone does, has a moral content for good or for bad, which matters for all eternity. I saw that my two greatest regrets when I died would be every hour that I wasted doing nothing of value in the eyes of heaven. And my other great regret would be all the time and energy I wasted worrying about not being loved, when every moment of my existence I was being held in a bath of love, a sea of love greater than I could imagine from this all-knowing, all-loving God. One of the deepest aspects of this experience was just realizing that God actually knew me by name, that he knew who I was, that he cared about me, knew me, had arranged every event in my life intentionally to be the most perfect thing that he could arrange for me. But I had not had this sense growing up. I think Christians in some sense have an advantage here because they are sort of taught that, Jesus knows you, Jesus loves you. My sense growing up was that there was a tremendous dignity to who I was, and a tremendous dignity and importance to being Jewish, which I will still argue and maintain is true. But not that, if you ask God, hey, do you know that Roy Schoeman? He'd say, oh yeah, I remember when he was 5 and did this, So the sense of being seen by God and being known by God was a profound part of this. And I knew from one moment to the next the meaning and purpose of my life was to worship and serve this God who was revealing to himself to me. And I prayed to know his name so I could know what religion to follow. And I remember standing there and saying, let me know your name so I know how to worship you properly. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan. I don't mind if you're Krishna and I have to become Hindu, as long as you're not Christ and I have to become Christian. It's perhaps too long a tangent to go into entirely what lies behind that. But there is a sense that I had, obviously, in some fundamental way, Judaism and Christianity is actually the same religion separated by a point of fact, which is who was Jesus. And if Jesus really was the Jewish Messiah, then Christianity is actually, in some sense, the correct form of Judaism, the continuation of Judaism after the coming of the Messiah. And if Jesus wasn't the Messiah, then Christianity is a sort of apostasy off of Judaism. So they're not unrelated religions at all. They are more intimately related than is possible in the normal course of events for two religions. And I think that's where this resistance came from accepting that it might be Christ and it might be Christianity. So I didn't know. He did not reveal himself to me, and I think that I was unwilling to hear it if he had told me. But I went back to Cambridge, where I was living, continued my life as a management consultant, fundamentally happy in a way, maybe for the first time of my life, because I knew that God really existed and I knew the meaning of my life. But I still really want to know who he was. So every night before going to sleep, I would say a short prayer to know the name of my Lord and Master who had revealed himself to me on the beach. And a year to the day after the initial experience, I went to sleep. I felt as though I was woken by a hand on my shoulder, although I know this was in fact in the context of a dream. The way it felt was that I was woken, that I was taken to a room and left alone with the most beautiful young woman I could imagine. And I knew without being told that it was the Blessed Virgin Mary. And she said she would answer any questions that I wanted to ask her. So I asked her 4 or 5 questions. And then she said she had something she wanted to tell me. And, she went through something she had wanted to tell me. And then the audience was over. And I went back to sleep. And the next morning when I woke up, I was in some sense hopelessly in love with the Virgin Mary. And I knew that it had been Christ on the beach. So that's the nutshell version of my conversion story. Although, again, just as I say that I consider myself still a Jew and more Jewish than ever, I also don't really consider it a conversion. It's coming into the fullness of the truth of Judaism, which in fact reflects far more dignity and glory to the state of being Jewish than I had any idea before my conversion, because what could be a greater honor than being the people who are chosen to bring God to man in the flesh?
Especially when you can think of conversion as a turning more fully in God's direction. You're still on the journey, but you're turning your focus more in his direction as opposed to the distractions of life and other alternative gods. I mean, that's what conversion is. And so a completed Jew is turning it fully in the direction of Jesus.
But conversion usually implies turning away from something.
Yeah,
and all of Judaism is contained within Christianity. There's nothing in Judaism which is rejected by Christianity.
Right. Which is, I want to get to later, because I think that is such an important point that sadly too many Christians don't recognize today. But I'll go back to here though. So now you recognize as Christ, you're deeply in love with Mary. Are you a Catholic?
No, I woke up that morning and I was in love with Mary. I knew that I wanted to become as good a Christian as possible. But I had no idea what a Catholic was, what a Protestant was, what the difference was. And I really didn't have much recourse other than to open the phone book and to look for a church. And I bounced around a little bit in some Protestant churches, but my love for the Blessed Virgin Mary usually resolved that situation pretty quickly, because as soon as I got to know the pastor, I would ask, and by the way, what about the Blessed Virgin Mary? And if he didn't hold her in the kind of esteem which I thought was her right, I knew this is no place for me. And the other aspect of this was that I really was in some sense in love with her. I would spend a lot of time at Marian shrines simply to sort of sense her presence to some extent there. And Marian shrines are all Catholic, at least in the United States they certainly are. And there would frequently be masses going on at the shrines. And I frankly wanted to receive the Eucharist, even though I didn't know what it was. I would just be there, and my heart would be leaping out saying, essentially, excuse me for putting it this way, but give me, give me, give me. I want, I want, I want. And without even really knowing where that hunger was coming from. So between having a devotion to the Virgin Mary and wanting to receive Eucharist, that did a pretty good job of directing me towards the Catholic Church.
How much longer did it take before you actually?
So it actually took 4 years between that dream and between being baptized. But it only took about 18 months before I knew I wanted to be baptized in the Catholic Church. But then it took about another 2 years to find basically to find a priest who understood where I was coming from and who could guide me correctly into the church.
That's an important issue, because I even find it not just for Jewish converts, for want of a better word, but Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodists, to understand the journey that we've come from this other tradition into our new tradition, to understand who we now are as Catholics, and to help us fill in the right gaps and leave behind the things that need to be left behind, as well as appreciate the wonderful gifts that are called to be brought in. I think that's a key part of your Jewish entrance into the Catholic Church. Did you find someone? How long did it take to find someone that could help you appreciate your Jewishness, that it wasn't something to be left behind?
That wasn't the problem. The problem was, how long did it take me to find somebody who didn't try to convince me all God wanted was that I should be a good Jew. I'm sorry to be in the street, but
that's the sad reality of today. Okay.
That was more the problem. I think that there are a lot of advantages to being born Catholic, but in some ways it's easier to see things from the outside than from when one grows up within it. And I think it's sort of silly that sometimes Catholics feel that to evangelize a non-Catholic is an intrusion upon them, or sort of being unfair to them, or being uncharitable. When in fact, if you're sitting on this gold mine, and somebody says, hey, give me some of that gold, you say, no, you don't really need it. That's hardly charity. I mean, charity is to throw open the doors and say, welcome in.
Yeah. But that's a good point. I mean, I'm glad you said that very much. We need to take that at heart, folks. I mean, this whole hyper-ecumenism that has infected our understanding of our faith. But also, were you able to find a priest, though, that helped appreciate your Judaism and build on that, or was that later after you came into the church?
Nothing made me appreciate my Judaism as much as understanding the truth of the Catholic faith. In other words, I didn't need a priest to help me appreciate my Judaism. I fell in love with my Judaism in an entirely new way and in a far more intense way once I realized what Judaism was, which was Jews being the intermediary to bridge the gulf between God and man.
Is that the theme of your book? Talk about how that led then to your book. Salvation is from the Jews.
It seemed the relationship between Judaism and Christianity seemed entirely obvious to me, and it seemed almost puzzling to me that it wasn't universally seen that way and understood that way in Christian circles and in Catholic circles. That, I mean, the true glory and importance of Judaism is only reflected through its role in truly bringing the Messiah to all mankind, bringing God to mankind, bringing salvation to mankind. The Catholic Church, Catholic means universal, right? I mean, the intimacy is now available between God and man to all of mankind universally, hence the Catholic Church. Prior to the incarnation of God as man, that intimacy was only available to the Jews. It was like an ethnic privilege given to the Jews, which was universalized with the incarnation of the Messiah and with the Catholic Church. Everywhere you look, Judaism is ennobled by looking at it illumined in the light of Christianity, and that is what I wanted to convey.
All right, well, that book is Salvation is from the Jews, Ignatius Press, and as I mentioned earlier, it's available on the Religious Catalog.